It all started with a letter that felt more like a threat than a notice. A crisp envelope from the HOA landed on my doorstep, stamped with authority, demanding that I pay a staggering $250,000 in fines. They claimed I had broken multiple community rules on my own property, rules I never agreed to, on land that had been in my family for years. The letter accused me of everything from unapproved structures to landscaping violations, even though I wasn't officially part of their neighborhood. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake, maybe even a mix-up in property lines. But the whole board wasn't treating it lightly. They sent more letters, escalated to legal threats, and acted as if they owned me. I remember sitting in my kitchen, staring at the fine print, realizing this wasn't just about money. They were trying to control land they had no right to. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I spent nights poring over old property maps, dusty deeds, and legal descriptions tucked away in county records. What I uncovered shocked me. Not only was I not under their HOA authority, but my land stretched much farther than I had realized. In fact, it covered ground they were living on. The irony hit me like a hammer. The same HOA threatening to take my home was unknowingly sitting on land that legally belonged to me. Suddenly, the power shifted. Their rules, their fines, their arrogance. None of it mattered once I had the truth in my hands. But the real question was, how was I going to use this knowledge? Would I fight fire with fire, or let them hang themselves with their own arrogance? That's where everything changed. I couldn't shake the thought of that stack of letters sitting on my counter. Each one was colder than the last, filled with threats about liens, court dates, and community obligations. They wrote as if they owned me, as if their authority was beyond question. The board president, a man named Carl, even left a voicemail telling me I better comply before things get ugly. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a fine, it was about power. The truth was, my family's land had always been a little unusual. My grandfather bought it decades ago, before the neighborhood was even built. Back then it was open country, just fields and trees. Over time, developers moved in, roads were paved, houses went up, and the HOA was formed. But no one bothered to look closely at the old survey lines. They just assumed the new neighborhood was neatly contained. What I discovered in the county's dusty records told a very different story. The plat map showed that the boundaries of my property overlapped with almost every lot in the subdivision. It made my head spin to think about it. Here was an entire community, hundreds of homes, driveways, and manicured lawns, all technically sitting on land that traced back to my deed. The irony couldn't have been sharper. They fined me for a shed on their property, when in reality, their whole neighborhood might be standing on mine. Still, I knew information was one thing. Leverage was another. If I rushed in too quickly, I risked losing everything. So I kept quiet, played along, and acted as though I was still on the defensive. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything, every letter, every voicemail, every smug word from Carl. Because soon enough, their own arrogance was going to come back to haunt them. The more I learned, the heavier the weight of the secret became. Every time I drove past the neatly trimmed lawns and saw neighbors waving to each other, I couldn't help but think, do they even realize they might be living on someone else's land? Some of them were kind people, the type who brought cookies at Christmas or offered to help shovel a driveway. But others treated me like an outsider. They whispered when I walked by, pointed at my yard, and nodded approvingly whenever Carl made another dig about me, not following the rules. To them, I was the stubborn landowner who refused to bend to the HOA's authority. None of them knew the real story. What complicated things even more was the personal angle. My friend Mark, who lived just 3 houses down, had always supported me. He warned me that Carl and the board were trying to make an example out of me to scare other homeowners into compliance. At the same time, he admitted that some neighbors were nervous. If I pushed back, they worried the HOA dues would go up for everyone else. Suddenly, it wasn't just about me versus the HOA. It was about me versus an entire community that had no idea they were standing on my side of the line. Late at night, I would lay awake replaying the possibilities. I could fight this in court, but that meant dragging hundreds of families into a legal mess they didn't even know existed. On the other hand, if I stayed quiet, the HOA would keep squeezing me until I broke. The balance of power was fragile, and one wrong step could set everything crashing down. The question wasn't whether I had the upper hand, it was how long I could hold it before the truth exploded. The tension reached a boiling point when the HOA decided to take things public. One evening, I came home to find a bright orange notice nailed to the edge of my fence. It wasn't just a fine this time. It was a warning that they were moving forward with legal action to seize my property if I didn't pay up. The words were bold, almost mocking, as if Carl wanted the whole neighborhood to see me fall. Neighbors walking their dogs slowed down to read it, shaking their heads like I was some reckless troublemaker refusing to follow their rules. Inside, I was boiling. They had no idea the ground they were standing on didn't even belong to them. At the next home meeting, I decided to show up. The room was packed, every chair filled, whispers echoing off the walls. Carl sat at the head of the table, smug as ever, speaking about community standards and protecting property values. He barely looked at me, as though I was already defeated. But when I stood and pulled out copies of the county records, the room shifted. The maps and deeds in my hands weren't just paper, they were proof. People leaned forward, brows furrowed, murmurs spreading like wildfire. I didn't give everything away, not yet. I let just enough slip to rattle the board. Carl's confident grin faltered for the first time as he realized I wasn't bluffing. The neighbors looked confused, some alarmed, others angry. Questions fired from every direction. What did this mean? Were their homes really on someone else's property? How could this have been missed for so long? I held my ground, but inside, my heart was racing. The truth was out there now, hovering like a storm cloud about to break. And once it did, nothing in that neighborhood would ever be the same. Just when I thought I had shaken the ground beneath the hoe, another twist emerged that made everything even more complicated. A week after that heated meeting, I received a letter, not from the HOA this time, but from a law firm representing one of the developers who originally built the neighborhood. According to them, there had been a dispute buried decades ago over the exact property lines, one that was never fully resolved. It was the kind of legal gray area that most people would have ignored, but now, with me pushing back against the HOA, the old conflict had resurfaced. Suddenly, this wasn't just me against the HOA board, it was me against the developers, the HOA, and potentially the county itself. The letter hinted at the possibility of eminent domain proceedings and suggested that the records I found might not hold up if challenged. Reading those words sent a chill through me. It felt like they were preparing to pull out every legal weapon they had to protect the neighborhood, even if it meant rewriting history. Meanwhile, the community itself began to split. Some neighbors quietly reached out to me, asking if it was true that I technically owned the land under their homes. They were nervous, scared, and in some cases, downright furious at the HOA for hiding this possibility from them. Others, though, turned against me, convinced I was trying to ruin their lives just to avoid paying fines. The air was thick with suspicion every time I walked outside. Carl, of course, fed off the chaos. He went door to door rallying support, painting me as a greedy landowner trying to take advantage of innocent families. But he didn't know what I had just uncovered in the developer's old documents, something even bigger than the HOA itself, something that could change everything once it came to light. The standoff finally reached its breaking point when the case was dragged into court. The HOA board, backed by the developer's lawyers, walked in confident, ready to bury me under paperwork and technicalities. Carl strutted around the courtroom like he had already won, flashing smug smiles at his supporters in the gallery. But I wasn't empty-handed. I had spent months collecting records, surveys, and deeds that traced the property lines back generations. And when it was my turn to present, I laid it all out piece by piece. The judge leaned forward as the maps came out, comparing the HOA's claims with the original county plats. The tension was unbearable. The entire room sat silent, waiting for the verdict. Finally, the judge looked up and said the words that flipped the entire balance of power. The land legally belonged to me, and the HOA had no authority over it. The $250,000 fines were invalid, and the neighborhood's foundation was built on property that wasn't theirs to begin with. Gasps rippled through the room, some people looking stunned. others breaking into whispers of panic. Carl's face drained of color. But just when I thought it was over, the unexpected twist came. The judge revealed something hidden in the very documents I had used, an old clause from my grandfather's purchase agreement. It stated that any community built on the property could, if the owner chose, be transferred into their control under a private agreement. In other words, I didn't just own the land beneath their homes. I had the legal option to become the hoe itself. The entire board froze, realizing that all the power they had lorded over me could now be mine with a single signature. And in that moment, the choice of what to do with an entire neighborhood's future rested squarely in my hands. In the days after the verdict, the neighborhood was in shock. Some people avoided me entirely, afraid of what I might decide to do. Others came forward, quietly apologizing for siding with the hoe or thanking me for standing up to them. Even my friend Mark admitted he never expected things to swing this far in my favor. For the first time in months, I felt the pressure lift from my shoulders, though the weight of the decision still lingered. With that old clause giving me the option to take over the hoe itself, I had to ask myself what kind of neighbor I wanted to be. Carl and the board tried to save face, but their credibility was gone. Without legal authority, they were just people with clipboards and loud opinions. The same folks who once cheered them on now looked at them with frustration, realizing how much time, money, and energy had been wasted chasing me down. In a way, I didn't even need to take over. The power shift had already happened. After a lot of thought, I chose not to sign that clause. Owning their homes on paper was one thing, but controlling people's lives wasn't what I wanted. Instead, I worked out a new agreement with the community, one that respected my property rights while giving them peace of mind about their homes. The fines disappeared, the threats ended, and the neighborhood learned a hard lesson about arrogance and assumptions. Looking back, the entire ordeal taught me that standing up for yourself, even against a system that seems bigger and louder, is worth it. The hoe thought they could bury me with rules and fines. In the end, the truth buried them instead. And that truth gave me something no money could buy: freedom.